Good morning. I'm Giuseppe Riccardi from University of Trento. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, although I'm a little bit far away and grounded by the strike. But still, I wanted to take the opportunity and thanks to Albert and the whole committee for organizing this. We'll now proceed to presentation only format. The topic of this work is how emotion unfolding can build affective scenes. And we've conceptualized, we give it a definition and evaluate it in a case study, in particular for spoken conversation. This is a joint work with Morena Danieli and Firaj Alam from University of Trento. So we're going to give a background on the topic, some objectives, and get into the core of the paper and lay out the design and experiments we did for the case of spoken conversations. So we are coming from a couple of decades where we've been designing conversational systems in the form of dialogue systems that originally were speech only. More recently, we have a multimodal conversation with agents a la Siri or Cortana or other. And soon, some of this it's already in the present, we'll see some of those avatars or companions or robots, androids you see on the right hand side. In the future, some of these machines will become your digital nurse or doctors or companion or butler. And if that's going to happen, we have to be able to do much more than be able to retrieve flights or get some reviews with a conversation with one of the Siri or Cortana. And in particular, we need to get these companions to become more personal, not just knowing your data, your GPS traces or call logs, but in particular to be able to connect um, cognitively as well as effectively. And that's really where our work starts. In particular, um, I wanted to remind that most of the research that myself and most my other colleagues have been involved have done a lot of research on emotion recognition, for instance, from speech, but also from other communities in the image processing. Sometimes this has been done in isolation. There have been a few cases where this has been done in ecological environments, such as call centers or others. And another limitation was the fact that some of these experiments were done in vitro. That is, that they used acted speech, actors, or simulations of situations. So what we like to do is to move beyond this, and in particular, recall what psychologists have known for many years and have already published for this. That is that emotions do not just happen in a vacuum. Emotions evolve in situations where people, humans interact, and they've studied this. So emotion influence ourselves, that we feel it, but also others that where we share a space or a conversation or an interactions. So the goal of this work is to move forward towards understanding dynamics of emotional states in the context of a social situation. And we believe this is going to be very important for the development of this new research field that is behavioral analysis, both for applications such analytics or design of personal companions. We took most of our inspiration in defining affective scenes from the model of a psychologist Gross, who published in 98 the model of emotion, which captures and encodes the dynamics we need to be able to describe the unfolding of emotion in a situation. And if you see in the block diagram here, and if we think about a situation where two individuals, but it could be more, are involved, the individual's attention appraisal processes in the box are affected by the situation, which includes objects, other people, space, virtual space, physical space, and the individuals can generate responses back to the situation that can be affected by this. Um, Obviously, and that's actually why we were looking for this kind of model, the model is dynamic. Both situational responses may influence each other. So we come to define the affective scene in terms of a temporal extension. And so in particular, we think about the affective scene as an emotional episode where an individual, if we think about a dyadic interaction, is affected by an emotional arousing process that generates a variation in their emotional state and triggers a behavioral and communicative response that could be verbal or nonverbal. In this case, in this work, we'll consider the verbal one. And the other component that characterizes the affective scene is the fact that it extends from the event triggered by the individual that starts the unfolding of emotions and has impact on the other individual. So that at some point, the two individuals, in the case of dyadic, they will disengage themselves from their community context, and that would mark the end of this scene. I think it would be useful to look at some examples beyond what we consider in this paper. In particular, in the clinical case, we have here a very famous case and examples that have been made available, by the way, through videos that are publicly available, and you can find it on YouTube. And this refers to the doctor-patient interactions, where there is Dr. Carl Rogers, who was a very famous psychologist, and that interacts with his patient, Gloria. And Gloria starts her unfolding by talking about the situation, herself being divorced, and how she sees herself with respect to the people that are close to her, like the father and the other relatives. At that point, Roger, the doctor, starts getting Gloria to get on a good track so that she feels positive about how to work out this sense of not being or not feeling good about her current situation. So videos are publicly available for you and for those who wants to take a look. And this is an example of how this definition we just gave could fit uh, and how we could, for instance, use these videos to annotate this with the emotion unfolding. Um, Another real example is what actually we dealt with in our paper, and that is the case of call center situation. There we have an operator and a customer, and usually the customer comes in, as you know, with either request for information, but sometimes it comes in with the problems, and sometimes this problem comes from something already happened in the past. There is a whole history and so forth. So it's not unusual to see what you see now uh, in the figure here, where the customer might start manifesting some frustration, and an agent might kick in, showing and connecting to the customer by showing some empathy and try to then engage, and that's the last part of this conversation, engage to calm him or her down, and then engaging the customer in trying to resolve the problem, and hopefully, and that's the last part on the right, the conversation into getting the customer happy about how it was resolved, and so get him satisfied, which is what most of the operator wants for the end of the call, which is would sign and mark the end of the affective scene. So it was based on this example that we collected roughly 1,700 customer agent conversations, and this was, of course, for real users and doing the real job for the operators, and customers showing and interacting with the operators, dealing with all sorts of issues they had. It was a pretty long conversation, less than 7 minutes. So based on this data we collected, we embarked on an annotation process which has been described elsewhere in other paper from last year. And we decided to describe this affective scene and to test evaluate our definition and map that definition into a notation protocol that could describe completely what was going on from the affective point of view, and so also the emotion unfolding. And so on the agent side, we defined and annotated empathy, and on the customer side, we annotated anger, frustration, and then one of the two possible final state of the affective scene, which could be dissatisfaction or dissatisfaction. So this is the block diagram of how the affective scenes maps in terms of state transition. So the affective scene might start from at the beginning, where and we here see the who first block. The customer might show first some emotion, could be frustration, could erupt in anger, or could be the operator that by anticipating the customer might show some empathy, for instance, and try to address and predict what might come later. And then in the middle of the affective scene, there might be different emotional state transition that could happen. And finally, the objective of this affective scene is to mark the end, which, as we said before, might end with a positive outcome or a negative outcome coming from the initial state. And so we could have a customer satisfied or dissatisfied. And so we wanted to, at this point, have this initial classification of the scenes at the first level, binary case, and then at the second level, where we're going to have four states. So the first binary classification task we'll consider is the case when we're able to detect who is the first to start manifesting the emotion at the very beginning. It could be the agent or the customer. And then we have two other cases. The agent first, we call, which is the one manifesting first emotion. And at the same time, this is the class where we might have an ending which is positive with the satisfaction, with the customer is satisfied, or negative, which would map into a dissatisfied customer. The third case, which maps into the other two states, is when the customer starts the conversation, the emotion manifestation, and the conversation ends with either positive or negative. So in total, we have 4 states for the last part of the tree and 2 states for the initial part of the tree. Here is a layout of our classification system. We've designed, and in the paper we have all the details about how we design a large vocabulary speech organizer so that we can transcribe both channels of the operator and the customers. We also were able to directly extract any acoustic features directly from the signal. Then we extracted features. You will see we had features both from the acoustic side and from lexical side. And then we applied 2 more steps before training our classifier. And there is either try to make a feature combination or feature selections. And lastly, we trained and evaluated our classifier on these 3 cases and 3 binary classification tasks. For the automatic classifier, we extracted features that came both from the acoustics, and we extracted raw acoustic features, and then we projected that onto statistical functionals and we thus computed one vector for each conversation. And similarly, once we had all the automatic speech recognition transcription, we were able to extract the lexical features and have a vector, so a bag of words representation of the conversation. And on top of that, we also use the scores from TF-IDF transformation, but we acted directly on the automatic speech recognition transcription. And the third type of features that we computed were psycholinguistic features, which is actually a good baseline. And in some previous experiment we did on personality recognition proved to be a pretty good set of features with, the cost is very small because it's a very small vector compared to the acoustic and lexical feature set. Before training the classifier, we combined them. We had both channels available from the operator and the customers. So we were able to compute on the left-hand side the acoustic feature and the lexical features for channel 1 and similar for channel 2, and we just juxtaposed the features from both channels. So we had for each conversation a vector representing acoustic, lexical features for both channels, and this would represent our conversation. Then we applied feature selection, and in particular we applied the relief feature selection method. Following normalization and discretization of our features, this has been proven, at least experimentally, this was good compared to other methods, and we've compiled all sorts of comparison of previous studies, so we won't comment on that. And for each set of features, we designed learning curves so that we were able to get a stopping criterion and select the best set of features for a particular type, that be acoustic or lexical. Then here we're going to report some classification results. As we mentioned, we're going to have three binary classification tasks. We use support vector machines. We use tenfold cross validations. And the feature selection was done at the fold level. So for each round it was expensive, but it was important to be consistent and congruent with all the rest. And in the end, we roughly had acoustic feature set which ranged between 1K and 4.5K features. Lexical was between 5K and 7Ks across the folds, and LWC, which is this set of psycholinguistic features, actually is very small, as I mentioned before. And the metric we use to measure the classification is something that is already used in other emotion recognition and personality recognition tasks, which is the unweighted average, which is a average of recalls. So here we have some results, and we show the random performance, and then we have results for acoustic only, which for instance is for so here we have some classification results. We show some random as the first line of results, and we also have standard deviation. We have acoustic only performance, which are well above the random in both tasks. Remember that task 1 is about recognizing who started the emotion unfolding, the operator or the customer, while task 2 is about, given that the agent started the emotion unfolding, how did the conversation end? And task 3 is similar to task 2, but the difference is that the customer started the emotion unfolding and the conversation ended either as a positive or negative state, that is with satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Um, so the acoustic and the lexical performance are both automatic performance, because remember that lexical performance are extracted from the automatic speech organizer and are the ones that give the best performance across all tasks. And LIWC somewhere sits in the middle between acoustic performance and lexical performance, which of course uses a lot of more features than LIWC. In one of the obvious um, goal for the future is to understand how the combination of this feature can help and improve, and we already have some very good experimental confirmation that there is room to improve the performance by the combination of the three type of features. So I want to conclude with some remarks, in particular that we proposed this idea of defining affective scenes, borrowing from a dynamic model of emotion unfolding in a situational context. We believe this is important to start modeling what our future next generation personal agents or companion might need to deal with or address when interacting with humans. And not only for developing companions, but also for applications that are start getting some interest, that is from behavioral analysis, automated behavioral analysis. Particularly what in the future is needed to understand is to understand that inventory, classification of scenes across scenarios, across social relations, and annotation of these scenes. We believe the annotation is very important process of the modeling. And then, of course, we're going to need to start, and hopefully the community will start engaging into a community level evaluation of these models and this scene. And for now, thank you all for your attention. Unfortunately, I cannot take questions and comments, but I'll leave you my contact if you want to drop me a note, ask questions. For now, thanks again.